Happy Halloween, Fright Night Vault listeners. The night is cold, the veil is thin, and something old is waiting to be remembered. Keep your lights low and your courage closer. Subscribe to the vault and never walk alone again. Tonight's story, the Hollowfield murders, starts now. It was October 31st, 1980, 15 years since Hollowfield last carved a pumpkin. The streets were empty, the air, a flat kind of cold that made every house seem hollow inside. Streetlights flickered with that faint sodium hum. Every window carried a reflection of the same colorless night, except for one. At the far edge of Sycamore Lane stood the old Mercer house. Peeling paint, split porch boards, a single upstairs window left open, even though nobody ever left windows open in Hollowfield. Not since what happened in '65. People still whispered about that night, about the little boy who didn't scream, about how he stood there, holding the knife, as if someone else had moved his hand. They said he was 6. They said he smiled. Now the house had new owners, Mark and Lila Hensley, both in their 20s, newly married and eager to start a quiet life. They didn't believe in curses or ghosts. They only believed in opportunity. Mark was a mechanic. Lila was a teacher. They wanted to restore the old Mercer place, make it a home again. When the real estate agent handed them the keys, she hesitated, said something about local superstitions. Mark laughed. Lila smiled politely. The woman never finished her sentence. That first week, the house was just a house. Drafts in the hallway, a leaky faucet, the smell of old wallpaper paste. But on Halloween morning, things changed. Lila found muddy footprints in the kitchen, small ones. They led from the back door to the sink, where the old knife drawer sat half open. When she called Mark to ask if he'd tracked mud in, he just laughed it off, said maybe the plumber had stopped by. But there was no plumber. By evening, the air turned colder than it had any right to be. The radio lost its signal, cycling through a hiss that almost sounded like breathing. Outside, children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere deep in the fog, though Hollowfield hadn't allowed trick-or-treating since the murders. At 7 p.m., Mark went out to blow out the candle in the jack-o'-lantern. It was still burning, a low, steady orange light flickering like a heartbeat. He stood there a moment, staring into its carved grin. Then he realized he hadn't lit it. When he came back inside, the television was on, static filling the living room, flickering across the wallpaper like a pulse. Lila sat on the couch, pale, holding the remote in both hands. "It turned on by itself," she whispered. Mark started toward the set, then froze. Underneath the static, a voice was whispering. Faint, garbled, like it was trying to crawl through the snow of the screen. 2 words, over and over again. "He's home." The voice cut out. The room went silent, and somewhere upstairs, behind the closed door of the old nursery, came the slow, deliberate sound of metal scraping wood, the turn of a lock that hadn't worked since 1965. Mark and Lila looked up at the ceiling together. Then the light bulb above them flickered once and stayed dim. Neither of them spoke. Outside, across the field, a figure was standing at the edge of the fog, unmoving. Too far to see clearly, but close enough that Lila swore its eyes caught the porch light, just long enough to gleam white. The fog outside thickened until the street vanished entirely. The air inside the Mercer house felt different now, heavier, damp, and metallic. Every surface seemed to hold a low hum, as if the walls were listening. Mark tried to shake it off. He turned up the thermostat, flicked the radio back on. A faint tune came through, Blue Moon, half static, half melody, the kind of song that shouldn't have sounded sad, but did. From the kitchen, Lila called softly, "Mark, come look at this." On the table sat a sheet of old newsprint, yellowed and brittle. It hadn't been there before. Across the headline, Mercer boy declared unfit, sent to Westmark Sanitarium. The photo beneath was faded, but clear enough to see the eyes. Small, dark, and far too calm for a child. Lila frowned. "You didn't bring this in?" Mark shook his head. Before he could answer, the phone rang. An old rotary, one they'd bought from an antique shop downtown, wired just that week. He lifted the receiver. No voice, just the faint, wet sound of breathing. Then a click. When he set it down, the dial kept turning on its own. Slow, deliberate. Each number grinding through like something forcing its way out of the past. It stopped at 6, then again at 5. Lila stared. 1965? The line went dead. Upstairs, the nursery door creaked open by itself. Mark grabbed a flashlight, even though the bulbs still worked. The hallway looked narrower than before, the wallpaper darker, the air colder. The beam of light trembled as he reached the top step. The nursery was small. Dusty toys lined the shelves, a cracked porcelain doll, a tin car, a music box shaped like a carousel. He reached for the switch. Nothing. Then the music box started to turn, one slow note after another. No hand on the crank. He whispered Lila's name. She didn't answer. But from the reflection in the nursery window, he saw movement behind him. A small figure standing in the hallway, pale and still. He turned. Empty. Only the smell of cold metal. Downstairs, the television flicked on again. This time, there was no static, only a clear, black and white image of the front porch. A fixed view, like an old security feed. And there, outside the glass, stood the same figure Mark had seen in the fog. It wasn't a man, not entirely. The posture was wrong, stiff, leaning forward as if held up by invisible strings. And its face wasn't a face anymore. Two hollow spaces where eyes should have been. A faint glow inside. No mouth, no breath, just the shape of something wearing what was left of a boy. Lila whispered, "Mark, it's looking at us." The figure tilted its head slightly, a motion too smooth, too controlled, then stepped forward until the screen filled with white light. The power went out. The house fell silent again. But from the dark of the hallway, a single word pressed through the air like a whisper inside their ears. "Stay." And this time it wasn't coming from the television. The house felt smaller now, like the walls had leaned inward. Every sound was amplified. The ticking of the thermostat, the groan of old wood, the hiss of air moving through narrow vents. Lila stood at the bottom of the stairs, clutching a flashlight. The beam quivered across the wallpaper, tracing the faded shapes of children's drawings that had been there all along, hidden under layers of paint. Stick figures with hollow eyes and red crayon streaks for mouths. Mark whispered, "Don't move." From the landing above came the soft creak of a footstep. Then another. The steps didn't belong to either of them. They were too light, too measured, like a child pacing in thought. Lila's flashlight flickered. The beam cut out. Darkness swallowed the hallway, leaving only the low orange pulse of the jack-o'-lantern outside bleeding through the curtains. Then came the whisper. Close. Inside the house now. "He's home." Mark moved toward the living room, careful, quiet. His hand brushed the wall. It was cold, wet with condensation. The air smelled of iron. He reached for the front door. The knob turned, but it wouldn't open. Every latch clicked itself shut, one after another, the sound traveling up the hallway like a heartbeat. From the nursery upstairs came the faint chime of the carousel music box, spinning again on its own, each note slower than the last, until it stopped mid-tune. Silence. Then the sound of something dragging across the floor. Lila took a step back. "Mark, please." The words caught in her throat. At the top of the staircase stood the figure. Small, barefoot, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, faded gray, torn at the shoulder. Its head tilted slightly, as though listening to something inside the walls. The eyes glowed faintly white, like the reflection from a TV screen left on in an empty room. Mark whispered, "Eli?" The figure twitched, a violent, insect-like movement, then stilled. When it spoke, the voice came in two layers, a child's whisper and something deeper behind it, speaking through the same mouth. "He's still here," Lila screamed. The figure lunged, not fast, deliberate. Each motion a jerk of muscle that didn't belong to it. Mark swung the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark and struck the face. No eyes, just sockets leaking a faint blue glow. He stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. The flashlight rolled, beams spinning wildly across the ceiling. The figure's bare feet slapped against the hardwood as it came down the stairs, one slow step at a time. Behind it, the photographs on the wall turned sideways on their own, every frame cracked. Lila reached the kitchen, yanked open a drawer, and grabbed the same knife that had been left out that morning. She held it low, shaking. "Stay away," she whispered. The figure stopped at the bottom step, tilted its head again. Then its jaw opened wider than it should have, the sound of cracking bone. And from inside came a voice that wasn't human at all. "He let me in." The lights flashed once, a white burst that filled the house. And in that flash, Mark saw something standing behind the child. A tall black shape with arms like shadows, its fingers resting gently on the boy's shoulders as though guiding a puppet. When the light snapped off again, both were gone. Only the knife remained, spinning on the floor. Mark and Lila stood frozen, hearts pounding, breath visible in the cold. Then, slowly, the television turned itself back on. No static now, just a single line of text glowing across the screen in white letters. "Welcome home." The front door creaked open by itself. Cold night air rushed in. Somewhere beyond the porch, children were laughing again. But Hollowfield hadn't celebrated Halloween in 15 years. Dawn came gray and empty. The fog hadn't lifted, it only thinned enough for the street to take shape again. Power was still out across most of Hollowfield. The air smelled faintly of burned dust and rain. Neighbors said they heard nothing, no screams, no sounds of struggle, just the power surge around midnight. A flash of light that rolled across Sycamore Lane and went out like a dying breath. By morning, the Mercer house stood silent. The front door open, the jack-o'-lantern burned out, its face collapsed inward. Deputy Wallace was first on the scene. He found Mark's truck in the drive, keys still in the ignition, the kitchen lights on, though the lines were dead. Inside, everything was still warm, as if the power had returned only to that house. There was no sign of Mark or Lila Hensley, only the kitchen knife, laid neatly on the table beside an empty mug, and the old newspaper still sitting where they'd found it, though now the photograph of Eli Mercer was gone. Just a blank white square where his face should have been. Wallace called it in, but the line cracked with static. From the upstairs hallway, he heard the faint sound of music, a music box winding somewhere in the dark. He followed it to the nursery. The door stood open. Inside, dust covered the floor, except for two sets of footprints, one adult, one small, both leading to the window. Outside, in the backyard, something was carved into the frost of the grass. Letters uneven but deliberate. "He's still here." By the time backup arrived, the power was gone again. The music box had stopped, and the nursery window was closed, locked from the inside. For weeks after, Hollowfield refused to speak of it. The house was boarded up, condemned, and left to rot. But sometimes, on cold Halloween nights, residents still swear they see a faint light flicker behind those upstairs curtains, a candle burning steady in the shape of a grin. "And if you stand close enough to the porch, close enough to hear past the wind, you can just make out a whisper from the other side of the door." It's a child's voice, soft and patient. He's home. Slip on your headphones, turn out the lights, and if you ever hear a knock from a house that's been empty for years, don't answer it. Subscribe to the vault and never walk alone again. See you on the next video.